In this business, you grow or you die. Do you play it safe and downsize and spend less money, or do we go big?
$95 million in gold lay locked in tubs, barrels, and crates, while a glacier groaned and cracked above the canyon where it had just been dug out. That number is not a season total. It came from one hidden pocket of ground in a place most miners called unminable. And before this story reveals how a frozen dead zone turned into a $95 million jackpot, make sure to smash the like button and subscribe, because this discovery is worth hearing. Glacier Canyon did not look like a gold mine. It looked like a trap. Ice had carved a deep scar into the Yukon, walls of frozen blue towering hundreds of feet over a narrow floor of rock and snow. The glacier never shut up. It rumbled, sighed, and snapped under its own weight. Every so often, a heavy thump rolled through the ice, the sound of the glacier shuddering and shifting, like the ground itself was breathing. While that noise echoed across the canyon, the regular Klondike season looked painfully normal. The main claims were doing okay, but in mining, okay is just another word for not good enough. Gold prices were up, but easy ground was gone. To pull the same ounces as past years, the operation had to burn more fuel, run more iron, and take more risks on thinner ground. Every cleanout felt like a reminder that the old days of simple, rich pay were over. On the surface, the crew focused on those regular cuts. Dump trucks rolled, excavators chewed up gravel, and Big Red washed yard after yard of pay. Underneath that routine, something else was happening. Money kept disappearing into a budget line that did not match any normal claim. New gear arrived and then vanished into storage. Specialized contractors showed up and then left without working the main sites. Those who watched closely could tell that a second game was being played, away from the usual cameras and away from the other miners' eyes. That hidden game had one name: Glacier Canyon. While most miners laughed at the idea of trying to dig under an active glacier, one crew was quietly preparing to do exactly that, risking an entire year's profit on the chance that a legend, a lost map, and a strange shadow under the ice were all pointing to something real.
The Glacier Canyon story did not begin with a drone or a radar scan. It began almost a century earlier with a prospector in the 1920s who wrote about a place that sounded like fantasy. According to his diary, the man had followed a moving wall of ice until he reached its base and discovered something strange. Meltwater spilled out of the glacier and ran over gravel so rich he claimed to see yellow metal flashing in the streambed. He described a river of gold pouring along the foot of the ice, nuggets lodged in cracks, flakes stuck to rocks, and pay he could scoop up with bare hands. The prospector set up camp and started working that ground, convinced that a lifetime of struggle was finally paying off. But the North took everything back in a single move. A sudden blizzard rolled in, temperatures plunged, and a flash freeze hit the camp. In those conditions, a simple mistake is enough to end a life. The prospector tried to hike out and never made it. The camp vanished under snow and ice. The rough map he had drawn vanished with it. For decades, the story lived only as a campfire tale. Old-timers would talk about a moving ice wall and a river of gold that no one could ever find again. Most people shrugged and assumed it was either exaggeration or a story that had been twisted over time. Then the diary resurfaced at an estate auction, bundled in with old equipment and papers that most buyers did not even bother to read. The pages were worn and stained, but the words were clear enough: a river of gold, a glacier, and a rough map that marked a canyon in the Yukon. The map looked crude, warped by age, and hopelessly imprecise. Many would have thrown it in a box and forgotten about it. Instead, it was treated like a puzzle. Modern maps of the Yukon were laid out side by side with the old hand-drawn sketch, and slowly certain lines began to match. A bend in a river here, a ridgeline there, a narrow canyon carved by ancient ice. Glacier Canyon. Once that rough alignment was in place, science entered the picture. A drone team equipped with ice-penetrating radar was hired not for research, but to scan the canyon for anything unusual. The drones flew over the frozen landscape, sending invisible waves deep under the surface and bouncing signals back up. When the data came in, it showed something that did not fit with ordinary bedrock. Deep beneath the glacier floor, running along the same path as the river on the old map, was a massive, dense band on the radar. It looked like a buried channel, a cut in the rock packed with something heavier than the surrounding ground. Maybe it was just a layer of dense rock. Maybe it was nothing at all. Or maybe the dead prospector had been telling the truth, and that band was the frozen remains of an ancient riverbed loaded with gold. Chasing it would mean dragging heavy iron and millions in fuel into a place where even standing still could be dangerous. Walking away would mean never knowing. The decision was made. Glacier Canyon would be tested, even if the cost was every dollar the season could earn.
Getting machines into Glacier Canyon turned out to be almost as hard as mining it. There was no road leading in, no helpful valley, no gentle slope. Just steep country, rough tundra, hidden ice, and broken rock. To move even a single excavator into the canyon, a new path had to be carved from scratch. Crews worked for weeks, shaping a narrow track across ground that shifted under the weight of each truck. In some sections, the ice cut down into deep crevasses, dark slits that swallowed light and looked bottomless. To cross them, the team had to build ice bridges and ramps, layering packed snow, gravel, and frozen material in a way that would hold the weight of multi-ton machines. Each crossing was a gamble. Each time a haul truck or excavator crept over a bridge, engines idled low, and every eye watched the ground. A single slide sideways would turn a brand new machine into a permanent part of the canyon. Once the convoy finally dropped into Glacier Canyon itself, the scale of the place hit everyone. The walls of ice rose up on both sides, 300 feet or more in sheer, glittering faces. The glacier groaned and popped, sometimes with a low rumble that rolled through the chest, sometimes with sharp cracks like nearby gunfire as ice shifted and broke. The sound never really stopped, and every noise was a reminder that the whole place was slowly, constantly moving. The air at the canyon floor was brutally cold. Temperatures sank to around -40 degrees. At that point, steel turns strange. Metal that feels solid at normal temperatures becomes brittle, and a part that would bend a little in summer can simply snap. Hydraulic hoses became stiff, then frosted, then frozen. A job that would take 30 minutes in normal conditions stretched into 6 hours as mechanics dragged out heaters and torches just to free bolts from ice and get hoses flexible enough to work. Against that backdrop, the operation had to solve one more problem: water. The big wash plant, Big Red, cannot run without a massive flow of water. But in Glacier Canyon, every pond, every puddle, every trickle was locked up solid. To even start washing pay, the team needed to melt enough ice to create a reservoir. So they set up a diesel-powered melting system, burning fuel to heat water and pump it into a frozen pond, slowly carving out a pool that could feed the plant. All of this cost money, a lot of it. Fuel bills climbed to over $20,000 per day just to keep generators humming, heaters running, and camp systems alive. Machines needed constant attention just to exist in that cold. Days passed, then weeks. Not 1 ounce of gold had been recovered. From the outside, Glacier Canyon looked like a disaster in slow motion. Huge costs, huge risk, and no payoff. On the inside, the crew kept grinding because there was no such thing as a cheap exit. The money had already been spent. The only way out was through the ice.
When the first excavator bucket finally bit into the canyon floor, it did not feel like digging dirt. The permafrost in Glacier Canyon was closer to concrete than soil. The machine's ripper tooth scraped, screamed, and shook the whole boom as it tried to break up the frozen ground. For every foot down, hours of hard work and hundreds of gallons of diesel vanished. The plan was simple enough on paper: strip off the frozen overburden, reach the old river gravels below, and run them through Big Red to see what was hiding there. In reality, that meant fighting through more than 50 feet of frozen gravel before the ground even began to look like natural pay. Once the deeper material finally started to show, there was a surge of hope. Trucks backed under the excavator, loaded up with the first real test material from Glacier Canyon, and headed to the wash plant. Everyone knew this first run would not tell the whole story, but it would give a first glimpse. If the mats lit up with gold, the risk might be worth it. If they did not, a very hard conversation would be waiting. The plant was fired up, water roared through the sluices, and the pay from Glacier Canyon tumbled across the riffles. When the time came to pull the mats and check the gold, the answer was clear in seconds. There was gold there, but not much of it. A few tiny flakes, a dusting across the mat, the kind of recovery that might be acceptable on a cheap, shallow claim, but not in a place that was burning $20,000 a day before a single gram was even mined. 2 more days of cutting did not change the picture. The crew pushed the cut wider, feeding more and more gravel into Big Red, but the results stayed painfully average. The numbers did not lie. At that rate, Glacier Canyon would not just fail to turn a profit, it would bury buried the entire operation in debt. Morale dropped. The endless cold, the constant noise of the glacier, the breakdowns, the long shifts, all of it hit harder once the gold counts came back weak. Some workers started thinking about the safer, saner ground back on the main claims. Some quietly hoped the whole experiment would be called off before the canyon claimed a machine or a life. Walking away would have been easy to justify. The risk had been taken, the theory tested, and the results looked disappointing. But the map and the radar data would not go away. When the old diary, the hand-drawn lines, and the modern scans were laid out together, one detail stood out. The dense radar band, the strange shadow under the ice, sat not in the upper gravel, but right down on the bedrock. The cut so far had gone deep, but not that deep. The operation had reached the first gravels, not the real bottom. That gap between where the machines had stopped and where the anomaly sat became the key question. Was it worth spending even more fuel, risking more breakdowns, and cutting deeper to chase something that might still be a myth? Or was it time to accept Glacier Canyon as a hugely expensive lesson and move on? The decision was made to push deeper. If the canyon was going to beat the operation, it would not do it at the halfway mark. The machines would be driven down to bedrock, to the very place the radar said something heavy was hiding. Only then would the final verdict be clear.
Going deeper changed everything. As the excavator ripped further into the ground, the feel of the material began to shift. The familiar light brown frozen gravel gave way to something darker and heavier. When the next bucket came up, it was loaded with soil that looked almost black, shot through with coarse, dense grains. To an experienced miner, that color means one thing: black sand. Black sand is made of heavy minerals that settle with gold when water slows down. When that sand starts showing up in thick bands, it often means the bottom of an old riverbed is close. A test pan from the new layer told the story in simple terms. Once the lighter material was washed away, the bottom of the pan was covered, not dotted, with gold. Coarse flakes lay over a base of fine gold, and small nuggets sat in the mix like gravel. That was from a single pan. The mood in camp flipped from quiet frustration to focused excitement. The crew began chasing that black heavy layer, tracking it like a trail. As the cut deepened and stretched along the canyon floor, the band of rich material led in one clear direction, straight toward the overhanging wall of the glacier. Staying on the pay meant digging into a tunnel that reached under the ice itself. Inside that growing tunnel, the world turned into a frozen chamber. Blue ice arched overhead in curves formed over centuries, lit by the dull glow of work lights and the reflection from the snow. Meltwater dripped from cracks and ran in thin streams along the walls. The ice groaned, sometimes so loudly that it drowned out the sound of idling engines. Radars and maps said the buried anomaly ran right through this space. The gold in the black layer seemed to agree. Eventually, the shape of the ground beneath the ice came into focus. The old river had not only cut a channel through the bedrock at Glacier Canyon. At one point, it had dropped over a ledge and carved a deep bowl in the rock. Over thousands of years, heavy material swirling at the base of that fall had settled into the same spot again and again, building up layer after layer. Then the climate shifted, the glacier advanced, and the bowl was sealed under ice and frozen gravel. In mining terms, that bowl is known as a glory hole, a natural gold trap where water once slowed down and dropped its heaviest load. This one was prehistoric, built long before any human had ever walked through the Yukon. The dirt inside it was nothing like normal pay. Gold was visible to the naked eye in almost every scoop. Nuggets sat jammed in cracks in the bedrock. Coarse pieces lay in the gravel like coins, not scattered but packed together. The team loaded a single excavator bucket of that super rich material and ran it through Big Red. The plant was not ready. The sluice mats were buried in gold so quickly that the flow risked pushing the metal right over the riffles and out the end. Washwater that should have carried only light gravel began to shine yellow as fine gold tried to escape. The plant had to be shut down and adjusted just to keep things under control. Most miners talk in ounces per 100 yards. Glacier Canyon's glory hole paid out in pounds per bucket. The lost prospector had not been lying about a river of gold. Beneath the glacier, that river had ended in a natural bowl, and the bowl had been filling undisturbed for ages. Now it was open again, and every minute the machines worked that ground added another fortune to the total.
Finding the glory hole did not end the danger, it multiplied it. Once the highest grade pay was located, the operation shifted into overdrive. Trucks cycled from the mouth of the ice cavern to the wash plant around the clock, hauling nothing but black, heavy, gold-rich dirt. Excavators never stopped digging. The camp moved into a true 24-hour schedule. Lights glared against the ice at all hours, and the sound of engines never fully faded. But all that heat had a cost. The massive machines, the constant exhaust, the concentrated activity under the ice, All of it began to warm the cavern in subtle ways. Hairline cracks in the ceiling grew longer. The soft ticking and sighing of the glacier turned into sharper snaps and deeper groans. Meltwater increased, running in wet streaks down walls that had been dry. Small chunks of ice started dropping from above, bouncing off machines and landing in the slush. Each new noise made heads tilt upward. Every worker knew that the same ice trapping the glory hold in place was also holding back millions of tons of weight. The more pay came out, the less stable the roof became. The crew stood in the middle of a race they could not pause. On one side was the richest ground anyone there had ever seen. On the other side was the glacier, slowly waking up and trying to reclaim the space. Crews pushed through exhaustion. Sleep became short and shallow. Shifts blurred into one another. Cleanouts from Big Red showed barrels and tubs of gold-laden concentrate stacking up, but there was never time to stand back and admire it. Every moment spent counting was a moment not spent digging. Then the glacier delivered a clear warning. As machines worked under the ice, a sharp, echoing crack tore through the cavern, louder and closer than before. A huge block of ice broke free from the ceiling, roughly the size of a pickup truck. Gravity did the rest. The block slammed into the floor with a force that shook equipment and rattled teeth, blasting shards of ice across the work area. When the spray settled, the impact crater marked the exact spot where an excavator had been operating only minutes earlier. That single moment ended any debate that remained. The canyon had made its position clear. Take what had already been pulled, or risk lives and machines on borrowed time. Engines roared as the last loads were scooped up. Trucks grabbed every bucket of pay that could be safely hauled. Then, the focus shifted from digging to escaping. Machines crawled out of the tunnel, crossing the unstable ground as quickly as the tracks allowed. Ice continued to fall in smaller pieces. Cracks striped the ceiling and the walls like a web. The exit track that had taken weeks to build now became a lifeline. One by one, the machines climbed back up towards safer ground. Engines straining, tracks grinding into the ice. Workers followed on foot and in cabs, eyes flicking back toward the glacier with every new groan. Once the last machine cleared the danger zone, there was nothing left to do but wait and listen. Hours later, the glacier finished what it had started. The cavern where the glory hold had been exposed collapsed under the weight of the ice above. The bowl, the tunnel, the workspace, everything was crushed and buried. The glory hold that had been open for only a brief window was sealed again, this time for good. If any gold remained in the rock below, it would stay there. The canyon had given up what it was willing to give, and then it closed its hand.
Back at camp, the scale of what had just happened became clear in a different way. Cleanups from the glory hole were not neat rows of gold bars or a few jars of nuggets. They were barrels, tubs, truckloads of concentrate, plus heavy nuggets and quartz-laced specimens stacked in crates. The field scales used for normal cleanouts were useless. The operation needed certified assayers to even begin to understand the total. Specialists arrived with gear and procedures meant for serious deposits. Samples were drilled from barrels, densities were measured, and calculations were run again and again. Every number seemed to come out larger than the last. Ounces turned into kilos. Kilos turned into tens and hundreds. Finally, the math settled on a number that matched the scale of the risk that had been taken. The gold pulled from Glacier Canyon was valued at around $95 million. All those weeks of building ice roads, burning $20,000 in fuel per day, thawing frozen ponds, fighting breakdowns, and working under a moving ceiling of ice had paid off in a single massive score. For anyone watching from the outside, it might have looked like a miracle find, as if a crew had simply wandered into a canyon and stumbled onto a once-in-a-lifetime treasure. The reality was very different. The Glacier Canyon haul came from a long chain of choices. A forgotten diary was taken seriously instead of being laughed off. A crude, hand-drawn map was lined up with modern charts instead of being tossed away. Money was spent on ice-penetrating radar instead of safer, more obvious ground. When the first cuts failed, the decision was made to dig deeper instead of packing up. Each step carried risk. Each step also moved the operation closer to the truth under the ice. Even with all the planning, Glacier Canyon still came down to a narrow window of time. The glacier allowed that prehistoric glory hole to be exposed for a short period and then sealed it forever. If the test cuts had been delayed, if the season had started later, if the weather had turned sooner, that window might never have opened. the $95 million canyon would still be hidden, just another dense band on a radar scan that no one had ever bothered to take. The real question now sits beyond that single haul. Glacier Canyon proved that ancient rivers can leave incredible traps of gold buried under ice, frozen in place and hidden from normal prospecting. That is one canyon in one part of the Yukon. Glaciers have carved thousands. Rivers have shifted and died countless times. Somewhere out there, other buried channels may be sitting in the dark, loaded with heavy material, waiting under permafrost that no one has dared to touch. Some viewers may see Glacier Canyon as a story of pure luck. Others see it as proof that myths, maps, and modern science can work together to uncover things the world was never meant to notice. Either way, the glacier's last secret has been pulled into the light, at least in this one place. The North gave up $95 million from a canyon that everyone else had written off as a frozen wasteland, and then it closed the door. For anyone who wants more true stories of lost maps, deadly ground, and gold that changes lives in a single season, a simple way to stay close to these discoveries is to subscribe to Gold Era 2.0 and keep watching as new legends from the goldfields are uncovered and told.